Welcome to the Exam Room Live, brought to you by the Physicians Committee. Hi, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll, and this is the healthiest half hour anywhere online today. Appreciate you joining us right here on Facebook and on YouTube. Coming up today, colorectal cancer being thrust into the spotlight following the tragic and untimely death of actor Chadwick Boseman. On the show today, we will be learning about how the food you eat can affect your chances of developing the disease and the steps you can take right now to try to live a longer and healthier life. Joining me to discuss are doctors Neal Barnard. Dr. Barnard, always plenty to talk about with this topic.
You bet there sure is, Chuck.
And consultant gastroenterologist and ambassador for Plant-Based Health Professionals UK, Dr. Alan Desmond is here. Dr. Desmond, appreciate you joining us, my friend.
Always good to join you. Always good to join Chuck. And such an important topic.
It is indeed. And you're also going to be keying in on the role that gut microbiome specifically plays in the risk of colorectal cancer, a connection that really has almost flown under the radar until today. We're going to be shining some light on that. And if you have a question that you would like to ask the doctors, go ahead and post it in the comment section now. We'll be prescribing answers a little later in the show when we open up the doctor's mailbag. But first, let's get caught up on the latest happenings. Here are your health headlines for Wednesday, September 9th, 2020. The number of coronavirus deaths worldwide is expected to top 900,000 today, marking an unwanted milestone in a pandemic that has now infected 27.5 million people, including more than 6 million here in the U.S. Doctors are again sounding the alarm about red and processed meat. The latest warnings come from a study showing meats cooked at high temperatures create a compound that is known to increase the risk of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. In a study of 51 participants, research shows those who ate a diet that was packed with whole grains, nuts, and legumes for 4 weeks had lower concentrations of the disease-causing compound compared to those who ate grilled, fried, and roasted meats. Red and processed meat have also been linked to a number of other chronic diseases, one of which we'll be discussing on the show today. And finally, the American Heart Association is out with new findings showing adults with type 2 diabetes may want to cut back on alcohol. A study of more than 10,000 adults with diabetes finds those who have more than one drink per day are more likely to have high blood pressure. And the more they drink, the higher it may become. Researchers say those who average between 1 and 2 drinks per day are 79% more likely to have elevated blood pressure levels. For those who had 2 or more drinks per day, the risk jumps to 91%. And among the heaviest drinkers, the odds of having blood pressure levels higher than 140/90 increased 3-fold. Following the death of actor Chadwick Boseman recently, the world is again being reminded of the unforgiving nature of colorectal cancer, which claimed the actor's life at the tender age of 43. Today, we will be exploring the disease, its causes, the foods that can increase the risk of it, the role gut microbiome can play, and we'll be sharing the latest research to try to answer the question, are vegans and vegetarians less likely to develop colon cancer? Joining me are Dr. Neal Barnard and Dr. Alan Desmond. Dr. Desmond, stand by, my friend. I will be coming to you in just a minute to talk about statistics and gut microbiome here. But Dr. Barnard, I want to start with you here because the Physicians Committee has been around for 35 years. And I'm curious, when did the notion that the food people were eating, the food that we eat, really is connected to our odds of developing colon cancer?
Well, foods affect our health in so many ways. They raise cholesterol, so that affects the heart. They change our hormones, so that can affect hormone-related cancers. But food's beachhead is the digestive tract. So in many ways, it's the most obvious disease that one would expect to relate to food. And there have been data for a long time showing that people whose diets were predominantly plant-based, people in rural countries where they may not have had means of having a meaty diet, had much lower levels of colorectal cancer compared to more affluent countries eating meat. So the data have been around for a long time. What's new is the specificity. We now can quantify your risk. We have numbers that can really show the risk that people are running by including these things in their diet.
All right, as a reminder, if you do have a question for the doctors, go ahead and post that in the comments section now. We'll be answering those a little bit later on when we open up the doctor's mailbag. But Dr. Barnard, sticking with you here, red and processed meats, obviously just mentioned in the health headlines today for cardiovascular disease and diabetes, but they also play a major role, obviously, in the formation of cancer as well. I'm curious, though, how does eating just one hot dog a day, something like a hot dog, eating just one of them a day, how does that increase our risk of developing colon cancer?
Yeah. Hot dogs are in the group we call processed meats. It's hot dogs, bacon, sausage, ham, the little pepperoni slices on your pizza. And the World Health Organization came out about 5 years ago and said that one serving of those per day will increase your risk of colorectal cancer about 18%. So let's say instead of one serving, you have two. It's lunch, you have two hot dogs. Well, 18 times 2 is 36. And what if that evening you have pizza with pepperoni on it? Okay, at another 18%, you can see where we're going. The cancer risk is going way up. And Chuck, if you don't mind my mentioning, at the beginning of the show, you talked about the recent loss that the world has had of a beloved a screen star whose life was cut short. And we've talked a lot about systemic racism in this country, and I want to touch on one other aspect of it. Black men have the highest rate of mortality of colorectal cancer of any group in the United States. Black women have a higher rate than white women. Black men have a much higher rate than white men. And although overall, we're seeing colorectal cancer rates descending bit by bit by bit, in young people, and when I say young, I mean anybody under the age of 49, they're actually rising. So who's going to be at risk? It's the people who have these foods marketed to them. So who is pushing bacon? Who's pushing sausage? It's the fast food chains. It's advertising. You turn on the TV every 5 minutes. They aim at a young audience to try to convince them you're immortal. This couldn't possibly hurt you. And I want to say it's taking a toll in all Americans and frankly people worldwide, but it's taking a particular toll in the Black population that's got to stop. We tend to think of food racism in relation to lactose intolerance. Milk increases the risk of prostate cancer, which is killing Black men at a much higher rate than others. But I think colorectal cancer should be added to that category. And I think the people marketing these foods should be ashamed of themselves. One last point, Chuck, before I hand it back to you. And that's, we've talked about red meat and processed meat. But any meat that's heated on the grill or heated in your stove has heterocyclic amines, these are carcinogens, forming in the meat. And the biggest source is actually not bacon, and it's not sausage, and it's not a steak. The biggest source of heterocyclic amines, at least in the US diet, is chicken. Largely because people eat so many chickens. But really, a cancer prevention diet means getting the animal products off the plate and the high fiber, healthy plant foods back on the plate. So back to you, Chuck.
All right, Dr. Barnard, stick around. I want to ask you to answer some questions when we open up the doctor's mailbag in just a little bit. Yeah. But Dr. Desmond, I want to turn to you now and follow up on what it was Dr. Barnard was just talking about, specifically about the mass marketing of these foods that are, so heavily processed and so affordable. Let's just stay with hot dogs and bacon here, okay? Give you some statistics. The National Hot Dog and Sausage Council here in the States estimates that 20 billion hot dogs are eaten every year here in the US. And on top of that, the average person consumes 18 pounds of bacon. Now, that can be turkey bacon, which is supposedly healthier, or it could be a chicken hot dog, which is also supposedly healthier. But you hear about that massive amount of processed meat that we're consuming. And my question to you is, can you give us some more specifics about how common colon cancer actually is right now?
Sadly, it's really common. And, Chuck, we talked to each other at the start of August, and we agreed we would do this session on a really important issue, colorectal cancer. Within a few weeks, it's in the international headlines through the sad loss of Chadwick Boseman. And, it's a good opportunity to discuss what we can all do to reduce our risk of this common and serious cancer. So I'm Irish. I live and work in the United Kingdom over in England. And here in the UK, we see 42,000 cases of colon cancer each year. It's our fourth leading cause of cancer death, our fourth leading cancer, and our second leading cause of dying due to cancer. both in the UK and the US. This cancer affects about 1 in 15 men and 1 in 18 women in their lifetime. So sadly, a very common cancer. Where you are in the US, there's about 150,000 people diagnosed with this cancer every year. And globally, it affects about 1.5 million people. One of the issues with this cancer, Chuck, is that the symptoms that you get when it's early can be passed off as, just a minor tummy upset. But I would urge anybody who experiences symptoms such as abdominal discomfort, change in their bowel habit, the passage of blood or mucus in the toilet, or development of iron deficiency anemia, to discuss with your doctor and see if it's sensible to get checked in case they have colon cancer. Because those symptoms often occur when the condition is relatively advanced, and because this condition is so common, and as Dr. Barnard pointed out, becoming more common in industrialized countries and becoming more common in younger people aged under 50, it's also really important to know about screening. So here in the UK, from the age of 55, every adult is offered the opportunity to take part in a bowel cancer screening program. In the US, that starts at age 45 by regular colonoscopy. So whatever your age, whatever your diet, whatever your family history, it's really important at that age to speak to your healthcare provider about taking part in a screening program. Because if we can do a colonoscopy on you now, we can find the precancerous polyps, these little fleshy growths that we can remove from your colon before they have the chance to turn into a cancer, and that can significantly reduce your risk. So I'm a screening colonoscopist myself. Doing colonoscopies on individuals taking part in a screening program is a major part of my job. Sadly, that means that as well as preventing cancers, several times a week, I may have to sit down with a patient just after their colonoscopy and explain to them that unfortunately I've identified something in their bowel which looks like a cancer. And that's always a difficult conversation. It's a life-changing conversation. Even if we have found the cancer early, it can still change that person's life. But early detection is so important. If it's found early, 90% of people will find a cure to the condition. We can cure early colon cancer. If it's found very late, if it's very advanced, I'm afraid, only about 15 to 20% of people will achieve a cure from that cancer. So early detection and prevention are so important. And as well as taking part in a screening program, there are so many things that we can do individually to to reduce our individual risks substantially. And, it's a great time to talk about those aspects as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about those in just a second. But I'm curious though, when you have these difficult conversations with the patients, how aware are they that their diet may have played a significant role in the fact that something is amiss down there?
Not very, to be quite honest. I think that what we're doing right now is so important. This is education. I spend a lot of my time in education, both through talks like this, through conferences. It's just about putting the word out there. Information is power, Chuck. And many people are very aware of the cancer screening programs, which are super important. But sadly, not many people are aware of the effect that their diet and lifestyle has on their personal risk. People know that cigarettes cause cancer. They're not aware that they also contribute to colon cancer significantly. And I guess people in general aren't truly aware of how much power they have in their diet and lifestyle to help reduce their personal risk.
Well, let's talk about some of the steps that people can take then. What are some of the top tips that you give these patients to say, hey, these are the things that you should be doing right now to reduce your risk?
Well, I'm going to give you some tips that, most of the patients who come through and have a colonoscopy at my unit gladly do not have cancer, which is a great result for them. We may remove some precancerous polyps, or everything may be all clear. But regardless, all of those patients will be given some top tips and a nice glossy information leaflet and a website address so that they can look at reducing their risk for the future. And these things are straightforward. Number one, eat your beans and greens. So beans and greens, a great source of vitamin B6 and vitamin B9. These vitamins help our colon, help our body to repair the DNA damage that makes cells go awry and turn into cancer cells. Having a diet that's high in these particular B vitamins, B6 and B9, is significantly shown to reduce your risk of colorectal cancer. In fact, a few years ago in the US, there was this trial called the polyp prevention trial by the US National Cancer Institute. And what they found is that, they took patients who had come in for colonoscopy and had precancerous polyps removed. So they were invited to come back a few years later to have another colonoscopy to see if there's any more precancerous polyps that needed to be removed. And the participants in that study who increased their intake of beans to 70 grams a day, which is just like a quarter can of beans, at follow-up, they had reduced their risk of developing further precancerous polyps by 65%. So that's just for the price of a can of beans. That's a big benefit. So number one, eat your beans and greens. Number two, eat plenty of fiber, more than 30 grams a day. We've talked about this before. Your live sessions, the exam room podcast, this is a constant theme. We need to eat more fiber. In the US and the UK, we get like 15 or 18 grams of fiber per day. On a healthy, whole food, plant-based diet, you may be getting 60 grams of fiber. I just want people to eat more than 30 grams at least. We know that eating more fiber, particularly whole grain fiber, substantially reduces your risk. For every 10 grams of whole grain fiber you consume per day, you will reduce your risk of colon cancer by 10%. Why is that? Well, there's plenty of reasons. We're not entirely sure. Fiber equals veggies equals antioxidants, which is helpful. It may be that simply reducing the getting things moving through more quickly is beneficial. And there's some microbiome benefits that we can talk about later. But whatever you do, eat more fiber. Tip number 3, Dr. Barnard already spoke very eloquently about this, is to avoid, in particular, the red and processed meat. The pork, the lamb, the venison, the bacon, the sausages, the meat pies, the cured hams, the pastrami. These have been so strongly linked to causing colorectal cancer that in 2015, the World Health Organization listed those foods as group 1 carcinogens. Just like cigarette smoke and asbestos, these foods cause cancer in humans. So just 350 grams of processed meat per week, or as Dr. Barnard said, just one hot dog a day, will increase your risk of colon cancer by 18% because they are just chock full of carcinogenic compounds, including heme iron, the HCAs and polycyclic aromatic polycarbons, nitrates and nitrites have all been implicated. So say goodbye to those red and processed meats, get rid of them. The other thing to do, maintaining a healthy body weight, helps to reduce our risk. The extra weight that we carry isn't just sitting there, it's biologically active. It promotes a state of chronic inflammation. It also promotes the production of insulin like growth factor 1, which makes cells in your body divide more, and the more dividing cells, the higher risk of various cancers. As we know, sadly, being obese or overweight is linked to increasing one's risk of 13 different cancers. And in fact, colorectal cancer is just one of them. Here in the UK, Chuck, Cancer Research UK estimate that 55% of all the colon cancers in the UK are caused either by eating red and processed meat, not having enough fiber in your diet, or simply being obese. So that's a pretty powerful statistic. Not smoking is tip number 5. Everybody knows that smoking causes cancer. Tip number 6, keep your alcohol consumption to a minimum. Unfortunately, okay, for those people who like a little glass of red wine in the evening, even moderate alcohol consumption can increase your risk of colorectal cancer. So please keep your alcohol consumption below the national recommended limit for your country. We talked, what does this add up to? This adds up to a healthy cancer preventing diet and lifestyle. And I was interested just earlier this year to see the American Cancer Society's guidelines on a healthy diet and the American Cancer Guidelines. And they, colorectal cancer was certainly in the mix when they designed those guidelines. They recommended that a healthy eating pattern to prevent cancer includes, and I quote, I have the quote on the screen here, so I'm going to read it. A healthy eating pattern includes foods that are high in nutrients in amounts that help you to stay and to get to and stay at a healthy body weight. A variety of vegetables, dark greens, red and orange, fiber-rich legumes, beans and peas and others. Fruits, especially whole fruits in a variety of colors, and whole grains. Once again, Chuck, a healthy whole food plant-based diet ticks all the right boxes.
All right. Yeah. So let me back you into a corner now just to kind of, answer this question once and for all. Do vegetarians, do vegans have a lower risk than others who eat the omnivorous diet? Are they at a lower risk of developing colorectal cancer? And if so, what did the numbers show?
Those who eat a healthy whole food based diet, plant-based diet, the answer is yes. And we know this from the Adventist Health Study. So Adventist Health Study, you've talked about the Adventists before, a genetically heterogeneous group of people who follow a fairly similar lifestyle to each other. They place a great value on community and exercise and eating a plant-based diet. Even the Adventists who do consume meat consume far less meat than the US average, just an average of about 50 grams of meat per day, which I think is less than half of the US average. And the Seventh-day Adventist study followed almost 80,000 Adventists for 7.5 years, and they found that the Adventists had 30% fewer cases of colon cancer than the US average. And amongst the Adventists, we know that about 1 in 8 Adventists maintain a completely plant-based diet. So they don't even have that extra 54 grams of meat per day. And compared to their meat-eating Adventist friends, the completely plant-based Adventists had an even lower risk. Their risk was 36% lower than the US average. So if we could wave a magic wand, Chuck, and if we could get everybody in the United States to eat like a healthy, completely plant-based Seventh-day Adventist, we could prevent more than 50,000 cases of colorectal cancer per year in the US.
My friend, that is what is called statistically significant. Real quick, if you have a question for Dr. Desmond or Dr. Barnard, go ahead and drop that in the comment section. I know a lot of great questions are already coming in. We'll be opening up the doctor's mailbag in just a minute. But Dr. Desmond, the last time you were on the show, we spent a great deal of time talking about gut bacteria and gut microbiome. And it's a perfect time to ask you, what role do they play in the development and the risk of cancer here?
Yeah, so 2 interesting studies that I would talk about here, because it turns out, Chuck, that our gut microbiome, these trillions of microbes that reside in our lower bowel, have a major role to play in how food influences our risk of colorectal cancer. In fact, a plant-based diet may even help us to avoid a potentially carcinogenic microbiome. Now, just last year, the world's leading medical journal, Nature, published 2 deep dives into the microbiome and colorectal cancer. And their results were really impressive. They combined data from multiple studies examining the complex interactions between our gut bugs and our health. And what they did is they compared a huge number of patients who were diagnosed with colorectal cancer and then individuals who were not diagnosed with colorectal cancer, and did a microbiome analysis and looked at the difference between patients who get colorectal cancer and people who don't. And they found some definite microbiome signatures associated with colon cancer. Now, the microbiomes of the colon cancer patients were substantially enriched with the bacteria that thrive on meat and fat. And that was consistent across multiple populations in multiple different countries with multiple different food cultures. So why is that? Why is it that bacteria that love digesting meat and fat would be found in individuals who sadly went on to develop colorectal cancer? Well, there's a number of reasons. Of course, it may just be a marker of their dietary intakes in general. But what's really interesting is these particular bacteria that thrive on meat and fat also demonstrate someone who's on a higher fat diet, who has a microbiome that has an increased capacity to metabolize the bile that your body produces to digest fat into secondary bile acids. So when you eat meat and fat, your body produces bile. Bacteria in your gut microbiome metabolize that bile to produce secondary bile acids. And secondary bile acids are directly carcinogenic on your large bowel. So they exert a pro-carcinogenic effect. And in fact, scientists have suggested that bile might be a carcinogen since the 1930s. And in 2019, we know why. So when that paper was published, they noted that the gut microbiome of individuals who unfortunately had gone on to develop colorectal cancer had a higher capacity to produce secondary bile acids, which are known carcinogens, and also those gut microbiomes had a higher capacity to convert choline from eggs and carnitine from meat into trimethylamine, which gets metabolized TMAO, a substance that produces inflammation. And unsurprisingly, the bacteria that digest fruits, vegetables, and whole grains were markedly lower in cancer cases. So we were looking at this potentially carcinogenic microbiome, could well be described as the standard Western diet microbiome. And the authors of those two papers were so struck by these differences, which were consistent across populations, that they proposed that perhaps we should be doing advanced microbiome analysis as a test for bowel cancer risk. And it makes sense, right? If you've got a lot of these meat-loving and egg-loving secondary bile acid-producing bacteria, maybe you're at risk and you should go on and have a colonoscopy, and maybe that's true. But of course, we know that we can reduce and even eradicate those potentially harmful bacteria within weeks of changing to a whole food plant-based diet.
Oh man, Dr. Desmond, you are an information machine, and that is why I am glad that you are here. And the viewers today, the exam roomies, it is your lucky day as well, because it is time now to open up the doctor's mailbag and tap into this information machine and get your questions answered. This first one is coming to you. You were talking about screening a lot earlier, Dr. Desmond. This question comes to us from Erin on Facebook. She's wondering, is screening necessary for those who follow a whole food plant-based diet?
Yes. Yes. So as I said earlier, when we look at the Adventist data, we see a 30 to 36% reduction in risk. But that's not no risk, Chuck. And, other factors, alcohol, obesity, cigarettes, and genetics are also important here. So although the healthy diet and lifestyle really helps to reduce your risk, I would encourage anybody to take part in.
Oh, no. It appears that we may have lost Dr. Desmond momentarily. We'll try to get him back. Dr. Barnard, if you're still with us, I'm going to pose this next question to you. This one comes to us from Helene on YouTube. She wants to know, what is it about processed meat that makes it worse than, quote, normal meat? Does it have anything to do with the meat itself, or are processed plant foods just as bad?
Okay, great question. No, processed plant foods are not just as bad at all. When we talk about processed plant foods, what you're talking about is taking, say, a grain of wheat and grinding it up to make flour. That's not really such a big deal. That might liberate the sugars a little bit. But when we talk about processed meat, what you're doing is, first of all, you're taking meat, which is a problem just to start with. Even before any processing has happened, when meat is cooked, carcinogens form in the cooked meat without any processing. When it's processed, certain things happen. Nitrites and nitrates can be added, and there are other things that can be added as well. Sometimes they may be smoked, or certain preservatives may be added. But the truth is that even though we have lots of reasons to understand why processed meats might cause cancer, is it the heme iron, the saturated fat, the nitrates, the heterocyclic amines, the benzoate, nobody knows which of these is the most important. And that's why researchers say just avoid them altogether. But the processed meats are terrible. The processed plant foods, it's a completely different situation, and plant foods are always going to be a better choice.
I understand that we have Dr. Desmond back. Dr. Desmond, any other final thoughts on getting screened, no matter what diet it is that a person is following?
Yeah, I think if any individual has a family history of colorectal cancer or polyps, it's sensible to get screened. And I got cut off a moment ago. We lost our internet. But Chuck, as I said, a healthy whole food plant-based diet, not smoking, maintaining a healthy body weight, avoiding excess alcohol, these all reduce our risk substantially. And as I said earlier, if we could wave that magic wand and get everyone in the US to adopt that lifestyle, we could prevent 50,000 cases or more per year. But reduced risk is not no risk. And I would urge anyone who's invited to take part in a screening program to take part. You've got nothing to lose. You've got nothing to lose by taking part.
Interesting question, Dr. Desmond, from Edith on Facebook. She wants to know, why do conditions like IBS and Crohn's also raise your chance for developing cancer?
So anything that encourages the cells in your body to constantly regenerate puts you at risk of developing a cancer. So I spoke earlier about how individuals living with obesity have a higher level of IGF-1 in their body. Individuals who consume animal products have a higher level of IGF-1 in their body. And that's a hormone that increases the turnover of cells and makes cells regenerate. So it increases your risks of various cancers. Similarly, in ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, if the condition is not controlled, the inflammation means that the lining cells of your gut are constantly having to regenerate, which makes it more likely that you will have an aberrant cell develop, which is the original problem that leads to the development of a cancer.
All right. And Dr. Barnard, this is a one that we get quite often. I want to pose this one to you. It comes to us from Loretta on Facebook. She writes that she recently took an antibiotic. Hearing our conversation now, she's concerned. She wants to know, how can I quickly rebuild good gut bacteria?
Well, I'd be interested in what Dr. Desmond has to say about this, but I'll tell you what I have found from my own work is that people used to say that after you took an antibiotic, you should take probiotics. These are bacterial strains that you can get in a capsule, or they're added to yogurt, whether it's a vegan yogurt or a dairy yogurt, and that people would load up on them. However, it doesn't seem that actually reconstitutes the bacteria in a better way than just leaving it alone and letting nature take its course without the probiotic. So in other words, as time goes on, your gut will repopulate itself, its own bacteria.
Dr. Desmond, do you want to weigh in on this, rebuilding good gut bacteria quickly after antibiotics?
Yeah, I'll give you 5 quick tips, hopefully 5, maybe 4. Number 1, eat a whole food plant-based diet and maximize your diversity of plants. That's the key. Number 2, spend time outdoors and in natural environments. Where do these bacteria come from? We don't grow them. We get them from our environment. So spend time in natural environments. Sleep can help. Our gut microbes run on the same 24-hour cycle as we do. Some researchers think they actually help to set our circadian rhythm. So there's some evidence of getting enough sleep. Exercising certainly helps. We've seen multiple studies showing that athletes have a higher rates of healthy bacteria, healthy fiber-loving gut bacteria, and avoiding unnecessary medications. If you need antibiotics, if your doctor recommends them for a significant infection, please take them. They will help you. They do have some side effects on your gut microbiome, but they are necessary. If your doctor tells you that you're taking a pill or a potion that you don't really need to take, or if you have a self-limiting infection and an antibiotic is not truly necessary, then just don't take it.
And I understand that you also have another study on microbiome that you wanted to discuss, one that you pulled up and said, hey, man, we got to get this mentioned on the show today.
You've got absolutely. So your watchers, your viewers, I highly recommend that you do a Google search for a paper, and I'm going to give you the title of the paper. It's called Fat, Fiber, and Cancer Risk in African Americans and Rural Africans. Okay, so that's a paper that was published in 2015. Really interesting paper. We know that colorectal cancer rates are more than 10 times lower in people living in rural Africa, living a traditional, unprocessed, plant-forward lifestyle than colorectal cancer rates in African Americans living in the United States. So in 2015, a group of researchers took some African American volunteers living in Pittsburgh, I believe, and they took some volunteers living in the KwaZulu-Natal region of South Africa, in rural Africa, and they did a diet swap, Chuck. So after 2 weeks of eating okra and tomatoes with maize meal and lentils and bananas and African potato salad, the American volunteers had increased their dietary fiber from 14 grams to 55 grams per day and had reduced their fat intake by more than 50%. And within 2 weeks, the Americans colorectal cancer risk profile plummeted to match that of the rural Africans. Similarly, 2 weeks of eating a US-style menu of corned beef hash, potatoes, hot dogs, spaghetti and meatballs, roast beef with mashed potato and gravies. After just 2 weeks, the rural Africans' colorectal cancer profile, in terms of their gut microbiome, their short-chain fatty acids, their mucosal proliferation rates, etc., had skyrocketed to match those of the Americans. So just 2 weeks, a very significant difference. And another really interesting take home from that. So these are two populations about the same age, living two different diets and lifestyles. As they went into that study, half of the US volunteers already had precancerous polyps in their bowel. As they went into that study, none of the rural African volunteers had precancerous bowel polyps. So there's a big lesson there.
Wow, that's insane. And how long was the study conducted for again?
It's 2 weeks, just 2 weeks.
Just 2 weeks, and they were able to glean all of that information. That is amazing to me. Final question, Dr. Desmond, comes to us from Mo. Mo wants to know, are there any screening tests that you feel are comparable to a colonoscopy, especially ones that may not be as invasive?
Sure. So in the US, if you're going for a screening colonoscopy, you will, by and large, always have a colonoscopy, often under general anesthetic. Here in the UK, our screening program is a little bit different, and we use a poop test called a FIT test. So that's an immune-based test to look for evidence of loss of blood in your poop. And if your test comes back positive or equivocal, it's only then that we will offer you a colonoscopy. However, it's important to say, Chuck, that we only use that test in someone who does not have a family history and in someone who has absolutely no symptoms. So if you have a family history or if you have any sort of symptoms at all, you need to go straight for that colonoscopy. In the US, you'll probably end up going for a colonoscopy anyway. But here in the UK, if you have no symptoms and we're in a screening situation, we may do a fecal sample to check for blood loss. The other thing that we sometimes do is called a CT cologram, or virtual colonoscopy. So that's a special CT scan where the radiologist puts a little tube in your bottom, they blow you up a little bit like a balloon, and they get some really detailed CT scans, and then they can basically do a virtual fly-through of a kind of a 3D model of your colon. And if they see anything that looks like a polyp or a cancer, you would then go on and have a colonoscopy.
All right, real quick, in 30 seconds or less, this one just came in. I want to make sure that it gets asked as well. Is there anything to the idea that cooked foods versus raw foods could increase your risk of developing colorectal cancer?
If we're talking about cooked meat, that increases your risk substantially. No one's eating raw meat, okay? But actually, there are some people eating raw meat out there. Yeah, there are some extremists out there who are eating raw meat. But yeah, so cooked meat increases your risk. So there is this issue of advanced glycation end products, these little crusty black bits that you see on the edge of any cooked food. And yes, they may increase one's risk of developing a cancer.
All right, and talk to us a little bit about the Happy Gut course that you're putting on there.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I didn't know we were going to talk about that today. So the Happy Gut course, not a separate discussion completely. That is just a course that I run with my friends Stephen and David Flynn at the Happy Pair. And it's just a course for people who, particularly for people who have irritable bowel syndrome, who want to make the change to a healthy whole food plant-based diet in a way that is really easy on their digestive health. And I guess it's also really useful for those individuals who are eating a healthy whole food plant-based diet, but find that all that excess fiber and fermentable stuff is giving them a lot of bloating. So we just do like this 6-week healthy eating course. All the recipes are whole food plant-based, but we also use the science behind FODMAPs to just make it a kind of easy on the digestive system.
Like I said, you are an information machine when it comes to the gut. Dr. Desmond, thank you so very much for your time, my friend.
Pleasure, Chuck, as ever.
All right. Give him a follow on Instagram at dr.allandesmond. You will not be disappointed. And if we did not get to your question on the show today, have no fear. We will save it and try to get you an answer on an upcoming episode. Really quick, as we wrap up here, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Barnard Medical Center because telemedicine appointments are now available in Texas, joining the likes of states like California and New York and Florida and so many others. So if you need help improving your eating habits and lifestyle, really want to lower your risk of of colon cancer. They can help you out with that. So pick up the phone and call 202-527-7500 or log on to barnardmedical.org for a full list of states where telemedicine appointments with our plant-based doctors and dietitians are available. And don't forget Dr. Barnard's 3-week series, Your Body in Balance, tackling diabetes. That begins tonight. Tonight is the night you will learn how to manage and even reverse diabetes, plus get nutrition tips and support right from the comfort of your own home. These classes guaranteed will help you take control of a condition that is now affecting 34 million Americans. That's 1 out of every 10. And that doesn't even include the 1 out of every 3 who have pre-diabetes and probably don't even realize that they do. So pretty concerning there. And Dr. Barnard, I'm guessing here as we close the show that food in this series is really going to be coming heavily into focus here.
Well, the whole idea is rather than just living with diabetes and let it gradually get worse, let's see what we can do to turn it around. And that means reducing our medications, reducing our weight, reducing our blood sugars. And if we can, let's get off those medicines completely. Let's get this disease to go away. You never know how far you're going to go until you try. That's what we're going to start doing today.
Course starts tonight, 7 o'clock Eastern. So everybody who registers, by the way, gets a copy of Dr. Barnard's book, Your Body in Balance. So head over to pcrm.org/events to sign up. And for this show, well, that's going to wrap things up for us today. My thanks again to Dr. Alan Desmond for joining us and to the crew behind the scenes that makes the show possible. And of course, to you, exam roomies who band together with us every day to help make the world a healthier place. On behalf of Dr. Neal Barnard and everyone here at the Physicians Committee, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll. Thanks so very much for tuning in today. And until tomorrow, stay safe, take a stand, and keep it plant-based.